Hey productivity pals, welcome back to the channel. Here at You to Do You, where we figure out how to customize all those productivity tools and hacks out there for you and your brain. I'm a nerd for this idea of you doing you. There's no one way to use productivity tools, and I want to share my love of diving into the details with you. So let's talk today about calendars. What could be more basic than a calendar? But do you really know what you use your calendar for? Now, that may sound like a ridiculous question, but if you think about it, there are actually a bunch of different uses for a calendar. And if you haven't really gotten clear with yourself about the various things that you might want to use your calendar for, you may not be set up to fully utilize it to have the most streamlined experience. Take a car, for example. The obvious use for a car is to drive yourself from one location to another. But cars can be used for other things too. You could live in your car. You could cruise downtown and show off with your buddies. You could race your car. You could make out at a drive-in movie. You could haul lumber. You could participate in car audio sound competitions. I just saw an ad the other day for a car that has a built-in massage chair, so I suppose you could do that too. Or, if you're like half of TikTok, you could be making videos in your car on your lunch break or whatever. So I'm sure there are other uses too. But you get my point. Calendars, like cars, have other uses beyond the obvious. And if you don't set yourself up for those alternative uses, but you want to use those alternative uses, you're gonna be bummed. If you're trying to haul heavy lumber with your car and you don't have the right hitch, it's not gonna work. But if you're clear with yourself, hey, I'm going to use this car for commuting to work and for hauling lumber, I'm going to A, get the kind of car that can do both, and B, make sure I have a hitch installed that can do the job. So you want to make sure you've selected the right kind of calendar that you need and that it is set up to serve the purposes that you want it to serve. And like cars, new functionality on electronic calendars does come out from time to time. And also experts tell you about their latest calendar techniques to use in your bullet journal or paper planners. So you have all these options coming at you. And so how do you know which ones to take on? If you were clear about what you wanted to use your calendar for, you'd probably have an easier time answering this question of which bells and whistles are worth paying attention to and which just deserve a pass. Okay, so what is your calendar for? What does it do for you? The most obvious, of course, is that it is where you keep your appointments, events with other people, the dentist appointment, the meeting with your vendor, a class you signed up for, and so on. Ideally, you'll see these appointments, these events in your calendar, and you won't double book yourself, and you'll remember to actually attend the event. Very fundamental calendar stuff here. But you could enhance these appointments with details about the appointment, about the event. Say the Zoom link, directions to the venue, links to related documents, hotel reservations and confirmation codes, a meeting agenda, and so on. You may have seen in Google Calendar that you can actually turn an email into an event, and that event will be populated with a lot of the emailed information just right there in the description box of the event. You can also attach documents to a Google Calendar event. And if you go directly to a Word doc from your event, there's a link for that where it says taking notes. You can track all sorts of things. The details about that aren't important today, but I want you to get the idea that you can link additional information to your calendar if you wanted to use your calendar as a reference tool for accessing event-related information. This video is not a tutorial on how to use Google products. I mean, you could even be using a paper calendar where you jot notes and paper clip information to the page that has the event on it. I'm just pointing out that these features of attaching information about an event is available to you. And if you want to use that, then you'll want to set up your calendar to do so. So I ask you, is your calendar the place you want to store information about an event? or is it better stored someplace else? What works for you? Okay, so while we're on the topic of appointments, or let's call them shared events, you might share your calendar with others in various ways. One option, you might have a calendar scheduling tool like Calendly or Acuity, where you can give a link to your public-facing calendar to let someone book some time with you. You can make scheduling a public part of your website, say, or you can just send the link to schedule to, specific people. But either way, this eliminates that sort of backing and forthing about the best time to meet. And some of these tools even let you ask questions of or collect payment from anyone who's booking time with you. Again, the details about the technology are not today's focus, but here's the question for you. How do you want to schedule meetings and appointments with your clients and coworkers? And how does that jive with the calendar that you have now and your general calendar setup? Okay, another classic way to share your calendar, you can give permission to someone to see your calendar on their calendar, like an overlay. This could be like your fellow team members at work or your family or whoever you want to coordinate with. In the Google universe, you can set permission levels. If you share your calendar with someone, you could allow them only to be limited to see if you are free or busy. They can see the event details of a time that you've already booked. They can make changes to an event, or they can have admin style role where they can actually share the calendar with others and have full authority and access. If you want your assistant to make appointments for you on your calendar, you can share your calendar with that person, give them permission to make changes, and boom, you've passed off your scheduling. Or maybe you're just sharing for knowledge. You want your staff to see your calendar so they know when you're going to be on vacation, for example. Or you want your spouse to see your exercise schedule so they know which nights you're not available for, family dinners. It's easy to find the instructions online for how to share your digital calendar with others, so I'm not going to dive into that. And again, you might even be on paper, which means maybe you have a big family calendar in the kitchen or a company calendar in the conference room. So instead of a tech tutorial with this video, I'm just going to nudge you to ask yourself if sharing calendars might be a useful part of the flow of your work or personal life. And if so, how do you want to do that? All right, let's dive into some other uses. You can use your calendar to keep track of deadlines and due dates. Now, that might sound obvious, but really, if you think about it, a deadline and a calendar event might be simultaneous. I have to finish the presentation for a launch party that I will attend, both a deadline and an appointment, the launch party in that case, but not always. An event where I need to show up and a deadline to complete a task are not really the same thing. A deadline could just be a submission deadline or a last day the tickets are on sale deadline. Or you might have a project and you've outlined like milestones along the way that don't actually involve anything except a commitment to have accomplished a certain part of the project by a certain date. So keeping those deadlines in front of you may help you pace yourself and plan your time to get the work done in advance of a deadline. And actually, even if you're somebody who procrastinates until the last minute, you still got to know when that last minute is, right? Well, I'll share you my deadline use here in calendar land. I do keep a Google Calendar for my upcoming events and other things, but I actually keep my deadline reminders on a paper calendar on the bulletin board next to my desk. And that way, when I'm planning my day and my week, I can easily glance up and see what's coming in the future this month or next. Like, for example, this week I was actually teaching. And so a few weeks ago, I saw these classes coming up on the schedule and said, oh yeah, I better make doing the handouts, preparing the handouts for these classes, part of my to-do list for the next few days. I personally have this deadline reminder on paper because A, it's easier for me to see, and B, the deadline itself isn't really a block of time, so I don't like that deadline taking up actual space on my calendar. So here's the question for you. Do you need to remind yourself of deadlines? And if so, is your calendar the best place to do that? Another major calendar use, blocking out time to do your own thing. Appointments with yourself, we might call it. A commitment to exercise, perhaps. A focused work block where you won't accept calls or notifications. Maybe a block to do chores and life maintenance tasks like paying bills and running errands. Maybe you even have a dedicated zone out time where you just chill, because you don't chill unless you block out the time to chill. And speaking of blocking, does this sound like time blocking? Yep. I'll put a link in the description box below to my video about why you might want to consider time blocking in your productivity universe. And I've actually got another video planned with more of the how-to of time blocking. So if you're interested, be sure to subscribe with that bell icon hit so you can get notified when that comes out. Okay, so meanwhile, you can ask yourself, do you want to use your calendar to make appointments with yourself, to plan out your day or week's activities that don't necessarily involve showing up at an appointment with another person or people? Or will you do that planning elsewhere? Or maybe you don't plan like that at all. Maybe you like to only keep the sort of firm architecture of your week, the actual appointments, meetings, events, and then when you're not in an appointment, meeting, event, then you just look to your to-do list and pick the next thing and dive in. So here's the question. How do you manage your blank time? Is your calendar the best place for that? All right, what's next? You could use your calendar to remind you about when to circle back with folks who are on your waiting for list. What's a waiting for list, you ask? Well, I made another video about that, which I will link in the description box below. But in short, a waiting for list is a list of all the tasks and projects that are on your plate, but that you can't move forward with because you're waiting for someone or something else. You could use your calendar to remind you of when to check back with specific things on your waiting for list. Like, yeah, it's November 5th. Time to check in with the committee chair to see if they finished setting the guest list so you can book the appropriate venue for the meeting. Yeah, a good use of your calendar. And if not your calendar, how will you follow up with your waiting for items? That's the question. Another related calendar use: reminders, recurring or one-off. Google Calendar does have a specific reminders functionality that you can use, or you can take advantage of the notification functionality built into regular calendar events to remind you of something, even if it's not related to an actual calendar event. For this, you would create a fake event, usually for a 0 amount of time and outside of your normal awake hours so you don't actually see it. It doesn't clutter up your calendar view. So like from 4 a.m. to 4 a.m. And you create this fake event and then set a notification or notifications to come to you via email or your device to remind you of something. I actually prefer this fake event option rather than Google's built-in reminder function because you have a lot more flexibility in an actual event as opposed to a reminder. The reminder just has one notification and you don't really get to decide when that comes up. But in an event, you can do multiple notifications and you can tell Google Calendar when you want those notifications to arrive. Those details of how you actually set up the reminder in your calendar are not important. Now, obviously, your paper calendar isn't going to email you reminders and notifications. So the analog version of this is to write reminders in your calendar and then review your calendar periodically to trigger you to take action. So will that work for you? Or would you rather keep your reminders in, a reminders app, or maybe a tickler file, or maybe you have an assistant who will remind you of the important things? So here's the question: what works for you? Where do you want to store your reminders? Okay, plugging away here in all these calendar uses. We've got a few more coming up, including one that's, maybe a little bit controversial. But before we dive in, if you're enjoying this video, feel free to tap that like button. It helps others like you find the video. Okay, next calendar use: birthdays. I actually keep a separate Google Calendar where I store everyone's birthdays as an all-day event. And each event is scheduled to email me on the day of, so I don't forget to reach out and send good wishes. You can also have multiple reminders set for a birthday, so you can plan ahead with gifts and parties and such. And while I have it as a separate calendar, I can switch this calendar on and off out of my view if I need to declutter my layout. and I can flip it back on anytime. Of course, you can keep a paper birthday calendar too. You can write them in every year, or you can buy a perpetual one, like a cute poster from Etsy or a cheap one from Hallmark. Or, there are also several smartphone apps that will integrate with your calendar to remind you of birthdays, and they might extend the functionality, like sending e-cards or telling you the zodiac sign of the birthday recipient. So take your pick, whatever actually serves you in remembering your birthdays in your life, if remembering birthdays is important to you. Continuing in the same vein of birthdays, you might want to see national or global holidays, or what we might call communal events, like major conferences happening at corporate headquarters, or maybe you want to keep your local football team's schedule at the ready, or maybe the schedule for your martial arts studio down the street where you think you might take some classes. You can even import a digital calendar of TV schedules of your favorite shows. So, anything that has a public calendar, you can grab that URL and add it to your calendar. And you can flip the view of these public calendars on and off as you need. Generally, I would keep them on while you're scheduling and planning and turn it off the rest of the time. Or again, if you are a paper person, you might grab their flyer and pin it to your bulletin board for reference when planning out your week or month, the dojo or the football schedule, just there on the bulletin board. And so here's the question: do you need to incorporate public events into your personal planning? If so, incorporating that into your calendar could be a useful piece of the puzzle. Also, while planning, it might be useful to have things that you might call flavor in your calendar. Say, the weather forecast, a world clock with the time in other zones. It's easy to Google instructions for how to add the weather and a world clock into your digital calendar, so I'm not going to explain that here. But there are maybe some other flavor things that could impact your day and your planning. Could be, say, stuff happening in your neighborhood. You could mark down when the tree trimmers are coming through in your neighborhood, because maybe that's not the best time to schedule the recording of your podcast when there's buzzing saws rattling the windows. Another example, you might have a summer outdoor festival and it's going to mess up the parking in your neighborhood. And it sure would be handy to know that there was going to be a parking gum up if you plan on driving that day. So here's the question: is your calendar the best place to keep that kind of flavor information for you? Another calendar use: habit tracking. There are tons of paper habit tracker options out there, bullet journals and the like. You can even check out the one I made for myself when I tested the Elastic Habits book. I'll link that video down below. There are certainly goal tracking apps for your phone and computer too, but I just throw out, just in case. Maybe you want to use your calendar so all of your whole life is all in one place. Or maybe you just want to have a blank paper calendar up on the wall where you can mark a star or a smiley face or something like that every time you did your desired habit. Oh, and by the way, I keep talking about Google calendars here. So just note that in mid-2022, Google stopped using its goals feature embedded into the calendar. So you won't have that special tool there for scheduling or tracking your habits. But instead, you would just create an event to show every time you did your habits, probably best as an all-day event. So it would be stacked at the top of your calendar, and you could see stacked events, and the more you did, the more you would know, hey, I'm on track. So I ask you, are you someone who likes to track their habits? And if so, is your calendar the best place for that? And that leads me to my next possible calendar use. You could create appointments to show how you spent your time after the fact. A time tracking tool, in effect. As you go on a break at the end of the day, you could make or adjust events in your calendar to show how you spent your time. Then at the end of the week, you can look back and reflect if that is what you intended, if you and your time had a good relationship together. If you were going to do this regularly, and especially if you were going to take it a step further and use your tracked time for invoicing clients or for company resource tracking, you'd probably want to find a way to export that time data so it's easier to read and analyze. A web search for time tracking Google Calendar integrations will give you some possible solutions, some paid, some free. So the question here is, Do you need to track your time? And is your calendar the best place to do that? All right, 2 quick miscellaneous bits of data that you can jot in your calendar. You can record business miles you drove for your tax records. And another idea, you could use your calendar for period tracking. Now, there are apps out there that do both of those quite well, and you can decide for yourself. Do you want your calendar to hold that kind of data that you've been tracking from your life, such as mileage and your monthly cycle? Or is that better stored elsewhere? And on to our controversial calendar use. This one I hear the strongest opinions about, and this is it: using your calendar as your to-do list. A quick web search will reveal articles like "Scrap your to-do list, how to live in your calendar," and "Throw out your to-do list, fix your calendar," and "Why calendars are more effective than to-do lists." And then on the flip side, you're gonna see ones like "Your calendar is not a to-do list," and 7 ways you shouldn't be using your calendar. In the end, I think people are using catchy titles to grab you and your attention and then serve you up a few paragraphs of how they like to use their calendar. In the end, I don't think it's really possible to keep your entire list of your projects and tasks in your calendar. If you're like me, you have something between 100 and 200, maybe even 300 items swirling around, and I just can't see how you could possibly make sense of that all in your calendar. But you could use your calendar to show tasks that you plan on doing on that particular day or in that particular week. And really broadly, there's kind of 2 main approaches. One is to actually put these tasks in specific times. That would be kind of a cousin of time blocking. In time blocking, we just block out themed chunks that you can sort of populate with a kind of activity or tasks that are of the same type. But here you would actually put specific tasks in your calendar, scheduling when you're going to execute each task. And the alternative is to put tasks in your calendar so they are visible for reference, but not specifically scheduled. So the question is, do you want to put the tasks you've planned for the day or for the week in your calendar? Personally, I jot my tasks for the day on a small notepad next to my desk, and I prop it over there so I have it at the ready, no mouse clicks required. What works for you? Okay, so I just counted. That is 14 different ways that you can use your calendar. Yipes! A lot to consider. And, I may have missed some that I probably didn't catch them all. So let us know your other ideas in the comments below. And in any case, you don't have to know all of these answers to these sort of 14 questions that I've posed. Maybe you don't know if you want to use your calendar in a particular way or another. No problem. There are lots of options, and it can get overwhelming, like you're supposed to know all the everythings before you start using your calendar. Don't worry about it. But I do suggest setting up an experiment. Think about what it is that you want to accomplish. Tracking your time, getting reminded, planning for crappy parking during the festival, whatever. And what tool you might want to test out to help you with that thing. Think about how you're going to test it and for how long. And then during the experiment, write down reflections in your journal about how it's going. Or if you're not into journaling, you can talk it over with a buddy, perhaps. When your experiment is over, look back and see what worked and what didn't. What lessons did you learn? I like this aspect of it, but not that. It worked, but it's kind of clunky and I need to maybe find some keyboard shortcuts to make it go faster. I like this, but it's going to be hard to develop the habit to remember to use it. You get the idea. You can reflect and refine and get a system that really serves you. This spirit of experimentation is the you to do you way, and I'd love it if you would share with us in the comments what you've learned in your calendar experiments. I mentioned earlier the time blocking video and the waiting for video. I will have those hovering over the screen now if you want to pop over to either of those to keep the love going. Meanwhile, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.